The adverbs of frequency. The adverbs of frequency. Alors, dans cette vidéo, nous allons voir the definition, la définition. Après, what are the adverbs of frequency? Quels sont ces adverbes de fréquence? Après, the position, leur position dans la phrase. Après, examples, quelques exemples. Et finalement, reading. Reading, c'est la lecture. Alors, the definition, la définition. An adverb of frequency tells us how often something happens. An adverb of frequency tells us how often something happens. For example, par exemple, on a un petit dialogue entre deux personnes, Adam et Steven. Adam dit, how often do you eat pomegranate? This is the pomegranate. How often do you eat pomegranate? Stephen répond par I rarely eat it. I rarely eat it. Donc rarely, c'est rarement, c'est je le mange rarement. Donc rarely, ça c'est the adverb of frequency. Alors, what are the adverbs of frequency? There are 11 main adverbs of frequency that we use in English. Alors, quels sont ces adverbes de fréquence? There are 11 main adverbs of frequency that we use, que nous utilisons in English, en anglais. On a always, usually, or ou bien normally, often, il y en a qui prononcent T, often, c'est pareil, or ou bien frequently, sometimes, occasionally, seldom, hardly ever ou bien rarely et finalement never. Never, c'est jamais. Alors, comme vous voyez ici, ces adverbes de fréquence, chaque adverbe de fréquence, ça dépend de son degré. On a 100%, always, toujours, 90%, usually, habituellement, 80%, 80%, normally, generally, normalement ou bien généralement, 70%, often, often, souvent, frequently, fréquemment, 50%, 50%, sometimes, quelquefois, des fois, 30%, 30%, occasionally, occasionnellement, 10%, 10%, seldom, c'est rare, 5%, hardly ever ou bien rarely, c'est rarement. Alors là, il n'y a pas une grande différence entre les deux, seldom ou bien hardly ever ou rarely. Pas grand chose. 0%, 0%, never, qui veut dire jamais, jamais. Alors, voilà, moi, je l'ai classé comme ça, comme vous voyez, on a type de graphique histogramme, on a 100%, 90%, 80%, ainsi de suite. Donc là, 100% c'est always, la couleur, elle est là. 90%, 90%, 80%, ainsi de suite, comme vous voyez, voilà. On a always, usually, 80%, normally, bien frequently, pardon, generally, bien normally, 70% often ou bien frequently, souvent ou bien fréquemment, sometimes, le voilà, occasionally, le voilà, seldom, c'est ici, hardly ever ou bien rarely, c'est ici, et là, 0%, c'est never. On appelle ça un type de graphique histogramme. Alors, quelques exemples sur ces adverbes de fréquence. Always, toujours. I always watch TV at night. I always watch TV at night. Usually, I usually say the truth. I usually say the truth. normally ou bien generally. My friends normally surf the internet. Often ou bien frequently. I often walk with my kids. Sometimes she sometimes forgets the window open. Occasionally, my brother occasionally eats chips. Seldom, we seldom listen to the radio. Hardly ever ou bien rarely, I hardly ever eat strawberries. Never, our friends are never on time. Alors, the position. Maintenant, leur position, bien sûr, dans les phrases. Word order can be confusing with adverbs of frequency. Here are different rules for placement in sentences. 1. In a sentence with one verb. In a sentence with one verb. If the sentence has one verb in it, for example, no auxiliary verb, we usually put the adverb in the middle of the sentence, which means after the subject and before the verb. Subject, adverb, verb, predicate. For example, Tom usually goes to work by car. Mary often asks me for help. Voilà. 1. Like before, comme avant, in a sentence with one verb. Pour le cas de la forme affirmative. In the affirmative form, for example, we've got, nous avons subject, adverb et main verb. I always watch TV. I, the subject. Always, the adverb. Watch, là c'est le verbe. The main verb. TV, le complément. Number 2. Usually after the verb to be. Après le verbe to be. The adverb usually comes after the verb to be. Subject, verb, adverb, predicate. For example, Tom is often late and isn't usually sick. Peter isn't always right. Voilà. Usually after the verb to be, regardez très bien. For example, this sentence, I am always happy. Je suis toujours content. I am always happy. I, the subject, am, la conjugaison de verbe to be, donc c'est I am, et là, the adverb, l'adverbe de fréquence. Always. Et happy qui veut dire l'adjectif. This is not the case if we put the adverb at the beginning or end of the sentence for emphasis. This rule also does not apply to short answers. For example, is she always on time? Tell her not to be late. Yes, she always is. She never is. Alors, the rule is broken in other cases too. For example, 3. In a sentence with more than one verb. If the sentence has more than one verb in it, for example, auxiliary verb, we usually put the adverb after the first part of the verb, which means subject, helping verb or modal, adverb, main verb, and predicate. For example, I can never remember his name. Anne doesn't usually smoke. The children have often complained about the playground facilities. Exception. In sentences with the have to, the adverb is in a position A, which means subject, adverb, have to, main verb, and the predicate. For example, we often have to wait for the bus. She never has to do any housework. They sometimes have to stay after class. 4. When using for emphasis. For emphasis, we can put the adverb at the beginning or end of the sentence. At the end is unusual. We usually only put it there when we have forgotten to put it in earlier, which means adverb, subject, main verb, predicate. For example, sometimes we go to school by bus. Often he waits for her after class. Usually, Peter arrives early for work. When using for emphasis, subject, main verb, predicate, and the adverb. For example, we go to school by bus sometimes. They like to watch TV often. Jennifer buys a new car rarely. Exceptions. Always can't go at the beginning or end of the sentence. Jamais. Le début ou bien la fin de la phrase. Never, seldom, rarely can't go at the end of a sentence. They only go at the beginning of a sentence in polemic statements. Then they have to be followed by the word order for questions. For example, never has there been a better time to overcome our differences. Rarely do we have an opportunity like this. Seldom had the orchestra given a worse performance. 5. In question form. So now we've got the question form. When using adverbs of frequency in the question form, put the adverb before the main verb. Je répète, when using adverb frequency in the question form, put the adverb before the main verb, which means auxiliary verb, subject, adverb, main verb, predicate. For example, do you often go to the cinema? Did he sometimes leave the classroom? Do they usually come late to class? Exceptions. Voilà, quelques exceptions. Exceptions, comme vous voyez. Never, seldom, rarely, and other adverbs of frequency with a negative sense are not usually used in the question form. 6. In the negative form. When using adverb frequency in the negative form, put the adverb before the main verb, which means subject, helping verb, adverb, main verb, and the predicate. For example, they don't often go to the cinema. Another example, she doesn't usually wait for an answer. Another example, Peter doesn't normally want to come with us. Exceptions, like before, we've got some exceptions here. Never, seldom, rarely, and other adverbs of frequency with the negative sense are not usually used in the negative form. Here are some examples. Maintenant, nous avons quelques exemples. 1. I am sometimes bored in the math lessons. 2. He's always taking things from my desk. It's really annoying. 3. He often cleans his bedroom at the weekend. 4. The children sometimes played soccer. 5. Mehdi often puts a hat on his head. 6. Kenza never gets up before 7 o'clock. 7. They are seldom late for school. 8. She sometimes goes swimming after school. Reading. Reading, c'est la lecture. Je lis. My name is Kenza and I'm 15 years old. On weekdays, I always get up at 7 o'clock because I have lessons. I really don't like to wake up early in the morning, but on Saturday and Sunday, I never get up early. I usually get up after 9 o'clock. On Saturdays, I always have piano lessons. Then I usually have lunch at my grandmother's house. We sometimes go to the cafe after lunch and I always ask for an ice cream. But my grandmother never buys me one. On Sundays, my parents and I always go out for lunch, and in the afternoon, we do an activity together. We sometimes go to the beach when the weather is nice. When it's raining, we usually go to the cinema. I love the cinema.